Welcome to Art Walkthrough, where I guide you through my thought process to make you better at the game of art. This painting was a long time coming. I've been working on this for about a year now, and I put it on the back burner. So the original brief for myself was to mimic a Riot level splash art for Machi, the hero of my comic book Magic Punk. And so the question was really like, what would Machi's login screen look like if he was a champion in League of Legends? What would his character select screen look like? What would make you want to play this character? And so you have to come up with a cool angle, something that tells the story of the character while showing off what they can do. Machi is a Voltmancer, which is a combat mage in the world of Magic Punk. But as usual with all my paintings, I start off with some thumbnail sketches. Just black and white ideas, just trying to get gesture down. I'm just trying to find the right pose, the right angle, something that would feel dynamic. And honestly, there were some cool ideas here. I particularly like the one we're looking at right now. But I'm trying all sorts of different angles. I'm not trying to get married to any one idea. I knew I wanted him out in the wasteland. I wanted to use that orange and blue contrasting colors that Magic Punk is sort of known for, at least in my own head. And I'm trying a variety of poses, and then I do a simple lighting pass on them, just black and white, keeping things simple. And then I even threw in some 3D models from Clipsio Paint to see if like this was even perspective-wise realistic to what I was drawing. And so at this point, I'm pretty married to this idea. So I start taking it down the path of line art, and I start doing the line art pass on it to prepare it for rendering. I made a little joke there with a friend about Naruto because, you know, this is basically the Chidori pose that Machi's doing. I wear the influences on my sleeve, okay? I'm not trying to hide what this is trying to be or what this is trying to look like. But then I figured, you know, there needs to be some storytelling here. So what if there's some bad guys in the back that fear Machi's power and they really fear what he's about? So we just throw a little storytelling elements. You know, I think Riot splash arts do this very well. They always have some characters in the background. They're not painted as well. They're not painted as detailed, but they're there and they kind of give you a sense of scale and what's going on in the world. Just trying to figure out the angle of the head, just trying to figure out perspective. And then I immediately go into just quick and dirty color. I'm just trying to get color on the page so I don't get stuck in black and white very long, because the more you do that, I think it's just harder to really make that leap into color. So the quicker you get into color for me helps you really visualize things and what the final is going to look like. Just doing a quick resolution pass on these guys in the back to really figure out what their designs are. And honestly, I'm really kicking myself for not spending more time in the line art phase. This seems to be something I do consistently, but I always skip over a good line art pass. And the more I paint and the more rendered my paintings become, the more I realize an essential part of painting is a good line art pass. You can go straight into painting if you want something loose and something strokey and something, you know, that looks nice and gestural, but to really get a polished rendered piece down, line art seems to be foundational. And the reason I say it seems to be is there are some people who swear by it and some people who don't, who can get results. But for me, I have found that skipping the line art stage, it gives me a massive headache. It gives me a massive headache every time I skip it. So I highly recommend spending time in the line art stage to really nail down the design choices around the character. Because once you get into painting and values are established and colors are established, going back in and mixing things up and trying to mess things around and move them around becomes a lot more of a headache. I'm working at 4K resolution, it's 16:9 4K resolution. My brushes that I'm using are just a simple round brush, and I just increase or decrease the size of the brush depending on what kind of edge I want to make. And I have a couple videos going over that. Sometimes your paintings are going to sit on the back burner for a long time. Your projects will just sit there and wait for you while you acquire the skill to do the art that needs to get done. And because this is a personal piece, I didn't feel like I needed to rush this or that it needed to get out the door. If I didn't feel prepared for it, if I didn't think I was up for the challenge, then I'm just going to wait. I'm just going to hold off on it. So it's at this point that I came back to the painting about a month ago. And I started really evaluating what was working and what wasn't and what needs to change. And one thing I immediately did when I came back is I started separating the painting into pieces. The hand, anything that needed a clear, hard edge that I needed to finesse values around, I put into its own layer. So the hand, the glove, the scarf, whatever it was that needed to be separated, it got its own layer. So that way I could get maximal control over the look of the painting. And I've done lots of studies since then. I've studied lighting, I studied form, I studied other pictures. You know, I came back with all this knowledge and I decided to reduce the contrast all over his body. He was way too bright. The actual lighting around his head and his face, it just was too bright. It didn't look realistic enough. There wasn't enough light fall off. So what I did is I created a really rough and dirty 3D mock-up just to see where the light might hit in this scenario, with a huge light source coming from his hand. And I only use this as a reference. I was not married to this. I simply looked at it and I said, there would be shapes here and potentially here. And then some of it I fudged. And that's one of the beautiful things about painting is you get to control where people are looking and how they're looking at something. I don't have to be married to the lighting. As long as it looks believable, that's all we're going for. It does not need to be photorealistic lighting. I can pick and choose what lighting works and what doesn't. And so I fudged a lot of the lighting on his face because I didn't like the way it looked. I wanted something a little bit more dramatic, something that lit up his face a bit more, and that wasn't married completely to the 3D environment that I had created. So the other thing I'm doing is just painting in a sky real quick, just soft brush with a sharp tip, pen pressure on its size, and just going in and sort of painting in clouds. Just keeping them nice and wispy, pointing directly to the character. You can see the composition here is everything leads to Machi's hand and leads up to his eyes, back down the crystal, to the bad guy, back into his hand. So there's this nice loop I'm creating, and I'm making sure the clouds don't become so distracting that you want to stay in the sky or anywhere else in the picture other than the loop that I want to lock you in the composition. I probably spent a little bit too much time rendering these guys in the back, but I thought they deserved some love. You know, put some respect on their name, so to speak. These guys are out here, you know, they're big, they're thugging. I felt like they needed some love, so I spent a long time rendering them only to blur them out in the end. I definitely am not the best at restraining myself when it comes to rendering things. I usually like to get everything looking as good as possible, and it kind of bites me in the butt a little bit because not everything needs to be rendered to that extent. Some things can simply be rendered with less brushstrokes, and brushstroke efficiency is something I'm still working on. And the easiest way to control this is to simply zoom out. I stayed way too zoomed in on these guys and their fingers and everything going on with their contraptions and things going on around them that I should have just zoomed out a bit more, gotten a little bit more loose. It is what it is. Because the hand was the central focal point, I did numerous photo references for this to make sure that it looked as good as possible. You know, back in the day, I had a bit of a Ryan Gosling drive face, where I bought myself leather driving gloves. So I actually had those around and I used them as a photo reference for this glove in the front. And that's simply because I used photo reference, a lot of photo reference. I even used photo reference of myself half naked just to find out if anatomically the picture was coming together well. I'm not gonna show you those pictures, I'm gonna spare you my dad bod, but I made sure that the proportions in that angle were correct. And that's why I eventually lowered his abdomen a bit and his waistline, was because after I saw a picture of myself, I thought, okay, my proportions are off here. I need to fix this anatomical error. And now he looks a lot more natural. If you backed up 5 minutes from where this piece is and saw his anatomy, you would realize, all the anatomy mistakes. And sometimes it takes months coming back to a picture to realize all the mistakes, or even 1 or 2 days. If you just walk away from a painting that you're really excited about, but you're not sure what's off about it, walk away from it, make some notes to yourself, and walk away from it for about 2 or 3 days and come back to it, and you'll realize what is wrong with it. And so at this point, I'm in the rendering stage. Rendering just takes time. But again, having the important pieces of the character separated into their own layers helps me, one, keep really sharp edges where I want and control my edges a lot better. And the second thing, it allows me to chunkify the painting, meaning I don't get overwhelmed by all that needs to get done. I just go by chunk. Whatever is separated, that's what I start painting and I focus on. I think his hand overall probably took me about 8 to 10 hours to paint, just the hand alone, with the added metal dial in there and everything, because I knew it needed to be as good as possible. So the hand was a central focal point, took me about 10 hours to paint. All around, this painting took me about 80 hours, excluding the compositing time I did in DaVinci Resolve for the final look of just the 2D painting. So even for these crystals, it may look overwhelming to paint that many things, but again, I just made selections of each face of the crystal, I put them in their own layer, and then I just painted those faces individually. Now, I didn't do every single face on its own layer. I did them kind of in, 2 2s and 3s. So that way I could just brush across certain portions of the crystal and get the nice look that I wanted. And so the crystals probably took me only about an hour, and then I copy and pasted them for the other side and moved them around a little bit because they're just background elements. They don't need to be that rendered. The rendered portions need to be Machi's hand, his ropes, his body, and his face, really. You can see me here painting and rendering the hand. I'm gonna be here for quite a while, I think. So all in all, yep, this hand just took a long time. Just lots of rendering, mainly using just a round brush and then my Mikhail's horse brush, which is a sort of gradated brush. So on one side it's hard and the other it's soft. And I did that kind of back and forth to create those changes in forms that the glove has. So the magical elements are nothing special. These are just, again, hard and soft round brushes that I use, that I paint, and then I use the liquify tool or a smudge tool to sort of get those wispy ends, and I sort of just jiggle my brush and push it through, and it creates a sort of warbling effect all around. And then I just layer and layer and layer. So I think altogether the effects for this piece were about 10 layers altogether, you know, a combination of add glow, glow dodge, and all those other things that need to happen. Even this late into the game, I'm still making changes. This is what I mean about having a solid line work done beforehand. It would have solved all these issues that I now have to address 50, 60 hours into the painting. But that's okay. All I do is I simply add a opaque white layer on top and I start redlining it to sort of self-art direct the piece to point out flaws, to correct shapes, and correct compositional errors. So it allows me to just take a step back, breathe, see the piece for what it is and where it's currently at and how it can be pushed. And you'll notice I still don't have the effects activated yet. I have not completely lost myself in getting caught up in all these extravagant details like the effects, like the particles, because that's all just icing on the cake. I need to make sure the recipe is solid before adding all the icing. And so since Machi is the focal point, I don't want you to get distracted by anything else. So I start adding a rim light to him and making sure that he just pops from the background correctly. Another thing that gave me a headache was the silk material. Silk is really fun to paint. It looks very confusing at first, but it's actually quite simple. But still, how it reacts to light is very confusing for me. So some things I just made up and it was something I came back to. This was another thing that really tripped me up, but figuring out how to paint suede leather was really difficult. And it ended up not being a super important part to the piece, but I struggled with it a lot. I did studies of suede leather. I tried a variety of different brushes and effects and things that could quickly speak to suede leather, which is the 3 central components that are holding his scarf together right on his neck. There's another 3 pieces of suede on his gloves. And so being able to correctly make choices about materials and then present those is really important. And I really struggled with the suede. I don't know what it was. I could not for the life of me figure out why I couldn't get this suede to look correctly. I over render his belly quite a bit and then I just sort of paint it out. Remember, we are controlling a viewer's eye. So if something doesn't make sense with lighting, but it looks believable, that's all that matters. If we can control their eye and where they're looking and what they're paying attention to, that's what we really care about. So like even for these final touches, I'm really trying to separate the key elements here and push back anything that doesn't add to the piece. So making sure his hand really pops, pushing back parts of his abdomen and just pushing and pulling on values to make sure that your eye is going exactly where I want it to. I really want it on his face and his hand. That's it. Everything else is icing on the cake. The enemies in the back, the fact that you can't see them very well is honestly fine with me. It doesn't matter that much to me. What matters is that you are looking at his face and his hand and everything else simply holds it all together. A lot of young artists, they question, when do I know something is done? And your threshold for when something is done is going to increase as you become more diligent as an artist and as you produce more work. You're going to start saying to yourself, this is not done, I can push it further. And sometimes you're going to walk away from a painting and say, that's the best I can do right now. I call this a benchmark painting. It's just to see where I'm currently at artistically in terms of my rendering skills. And this is the best I can do right now. It's not the best I'm going to do ever. It's just the best I can do right now. And I'm happy with it. I'm very happy with it. But I'll be disappointed with it in a few months and know that I can do better. And that's an important feeling to have as an artist, that you are constantly growing and that your next piece will always be better than your previous. But it can be very discouraging as an artist to see someone who's done dozens of paintings and think, why can't I paint at that level yet? It's just you haven't put in the time. You don't have that threshold. That's okay. Just keep going and you'll eventually get there. If you're young and you're comparing your work to mine, that isn't fair to yourself. You need to compare your work to what your last work was. Because if you're not growing, then you're not addressing issues and you're not identifying weaknesses that you have. And it might be that you don't know how to identify weaknesses in yourself and you don't know what you're struggling with, which is where feedback from people is really important. And being in a community where you can get feedback is equally important. Find some art server out there where you can make friends with people who will give you honest feedback about your work. All right, so now I'm in DaVinci Resolve Fusion. I have the studio version, but the free version should work just the same. So on the left is the painting that I added to Clipsio Paint, and on the right is the final composite that I did. And I went back and painted in a quick layer of lightning to add lightning effects to the magic that he's pulling into his hand. And so I imported those as their own separate layer. But let me just walk you through what I did. So first I displace and add a little ripple effects to this. And the cool thing about this is, I could get a different look and sort of do real-time compositing on this, which gave me the idea to animate it, which we will go over in the next two videos. But just for the painting, I didn't need this to move, but it is cool that you can get different effects. And the reason I brought it in here is I actually want to include DaVinci Resolve Fusion as the final step in all of my post-processing painting workflow, because it's so powerful and non-destructive that it saves me so much time compared to Clipsio Paint or Photoshop. This is just a superior way to get 2D effects applied quickly. It kind of boggles my mind that a VFX program does 2D image editing better than dedicated 2D image editing programs, but that's what it is. This has better color grading, better effects, better post-processing, all that. So the next thing I did is I imported this lightning layer that I was telling you about. So I painted in this lightning very quickly, then I add some glow to it. Again, I can quickly control how good this glow looks, and it just looks nice. Then I add some chromatic aberration and I add it back on top. So before we were here, now we're here. The next thing I do is I painted in some rocks, brought them in separately, added a radial blur to it to make them look like they were spinning, and I added those on top. Then I include a high pass. A high pass is just sort of a edge detection, and then I threw it on top of the piece. So this was before and after, adds a little bit of nice sharpening. And this was actually from a whole wormhole to go down, so I don't want to go down this rabbit trail, but in Fusion, there is a whole host of community-made plugins called Reactor. This is from Reactor, and it's called STX High Pass, so if you're familiar with that. Right, and then finally, we have this directional blur, which I think I did apply a little bit. I just blurred out this portion of his rope. Then what I did is created a depth map. And a depth map is an AI-powered tool inside DaVinci Resolve Fusion that allows you to separate foreground and background elements. Then I manually cleaned it up a little bit, manually sharpened his hair, added brightness and contrast to really push it, used a Luma keyer to create a transparent output of this, so that way I could mask in the defocus. So defocus is again, really powerful tool. It allowed you to create and simulate lens effects. So wherever is white is what the defocus is actually using as a mask. So if I were to get rid of this, all right, you kind of see it everywhere. Again, chromatic aberration applied. This is called ML Fast Chroma. This is another plugin from the community of DaVinci Resolve Fusion. Then I added a lens blur that's applied here, that is applied in this area. So anywhere that is white, lens blur is applied. Okay, so here it is without it. Here it is with it. It's very, very subtle. So then there's this, again, really cool preset that you can download called lens flares. They're called ML lens flares. And for 10 bucks on his Gumroad, he gives you a whole host of preset lens flares. I 100% bought those. So cool. And you just copy paste it in here. Boom, done. Really cool dynamic lens flare. One thing that's really cool about this is just the ability to control where the lens flare looks. And so I put it right here in the corner. I didn't want it to be too distracting, but you could put it anywhere. It looks really good. Then I added an unsharp mask. So I sharpened up some areas. You'll see here. So here it is without it. Here it is with it. And if you want the secret to photorealistic looking paintings and these kind of like effects around here, and especially on the hand, it's just a sharpening tool. Use the sharpening tool to really push pixels around. And it gives you this, I can only think of the term from pixel art, but it gives you this like sub-pixel detail. It's not actually sub-pixel, but it looks very, very like it's doing something that's impossible. Added a slight vignette to really cool off this area. So again, making sure that the focal point is on this general loop right here. Then applied film grain. And again, this film grain, before, after, very subtle, looks really nice. And then finally, my signature somewhere. Well, it was supposed to be my signature. I think it was down here in the corner. I don't know. That was supposed to be my signature. That's all right. No worries. So that's it. So using DaVinci Resolve Fusion, we can go from this to this. Thanks for watching, guys. In the next video, I'm going to show you how I used Moho 14 to bring Machi to life. Support my work on Patreon if you like it. Stick around for videos by subscribing. As always, go and make good art.